This video is all about street outreach projects and street outreach data entry. So street outreach projects are a little bit different than most projects. Street outreach providers will create a client and do an entry regardless of how much information they have. So to do this, you would first enter any identifying information you had about the client. It could be just a simple last name. So maybe you just have a first name as Robert. So you can add Robert. You may or may not get a last name. If you don't get a last name, I would strongly suggest you just put something in the last name section. Most street outreach projects will use some kind of identifying location marker where they met with the client or where they found the client or where the client said they reside most time. So maybe you met with the client at the drop-in center. So you're just going to put drop-in center. That's where he was located. His first name is Robert. So you'll answer the data quality question for the name and you'll put partial street name or code name reported. You can add an alias so maybe the person referenced Robert in a different way and had called him something different. So maybe he called him Bub. So you could put the alias in there just so you can have some level of reference in the system. If a person gives you their age, but not their date of birth, you can add an approximate age. So maybe approximate date of birth. So maybe they said they were 30 years old. So you don't know the month or the date that they were born, but they mentioned they were 30. So you'll just put January 1st and then add and subtract 30 years from this year. So it'll end up being 1993. And you'll answer the equality question for the date of birth, date equality for approximate or partial date of birth. Again, this gives the system a little bit more information to find possible matches. Social security number, if you do have any information, add it as well. If you don't obtain it, just put data not collected. The same with U.S. military veteran status. And then race, ethnicity, and gender. If whatever information you have, you'll enter here and click the search button. So you want to make sure to search for possible matches. But if you have limited data, most of the time, the system's not going to pull up a match. If that does happen, then you're going to go ahead and add a new client with this information. You'll get the warning that asks you, you're going to add a new client. Are you sure? Click OK. With street outreach clients specifically, you'll get whatever information you can at initial contact. You can always go back into the system and edit this data later. So if you do get a full name, you do get a social military veteran status, the real date of birth, and race, ethnicity, and gender information, you can edit it in your client profile section for this specific client. If you are able to get release of information or household information, you can also add that there. The entry exit tab is where you're going to create your entry exit through the clients module. Again, creating your entry after you have your first contact with the client. Just a quick key, if you have a provider, once you start to add an entry that's not the provider for street outreach, you're going to go ahead and cancel that. Make sure you always change your enter data as to the provider you're adding information for. So click your specific provider. You can, if you forget to do it, go to last viewed. You'll always see your client name in there during your login period. And now you can go back to the entry exit tab and start your entry. When you first add your entry exit, you'll see your provider pop up, your provider type. Make sure you know your provider type for your street outreach project. Your project start date will auto-populate with today's date. If you didn't get to enter the data on the same day that you saw the client or had the contact with the client, you can always change the date and backdate this information to when you did. Once you do that, you can save and continue. So you'll see your entry assessment auto-populate. You're going to fill out as much information as you can. The only two data points that you must fill out, and these are data points that you usually know, especially if it's a single individual, the relationship of head of household must be answered for you to save your entry. So most of the time, it's a single individual, you can say self. And then enrollment COC. So making sure you're answering your COC code to identify the geographic location where this unsheltered individual is staying. So for this entry in this project specifically, it's New York 505. Any information you get, you can add here too. If you aren't able to add any of these data points because it's the first initial contact, the only other data set that you must fill out is the current living situation sub-assessment. This identifies that this individual was considered unsheltered on this date. It helps us with documentation of unsheltered homeless time. So you're going to go ahead and add the current living situation, the start date, and the end date and the information date will all be the same. So this is the one contact in the current living situation that you've identified on this date. The current living situation of where this person was living or where they said they were living upon your initial contact. So if they were in a place not meant for human habitation, you will say that. If for some reason they said that they were living or staying in a friend's room or apartment, you'll choose that one. If you do choose something similar to if they were in a type of either temporary or permanent housing situation, you're always going to answer, is client going to have to leave their current living situation within 14 days? So this helps to identify if you have somebody who may be couch surfing for a short amount of time, but they do have some long episodes of homeless situations that are unsheltered. But for this entry purpose, we're going to say that this person is living outdoors. The living situation verified is the provider who's identifying their living situation, which is usually the project that you're doing the data entry for. So in this case, we're going to say it was in my father's kitchen, street outreach. Is the client going to have to leave their current living situation in 14 days? Yes or no? And then if you ever answer yes to this question, you have to answer these next questions located below. Has a subsequent residence been identified? Does individual or family have resources or support networks to obtain other permanent housing? Has the client had a lease or ownership interest in a permanent housing unit in the last 60 days? Or has the client moved 2 or more times in the last 60 days? Again, this is only if you answer yes to this first question about if they're going to leave their current living situation in 14 days. The client location details is a good tool to use. It just helps you give a little bit more information about where you found the client. So if it was under a bridge and they were standing on a specific corner, putting the 2 street locations that help identify that corner, any other identifiers of what building or house that they were living in, even if you get an address of an abandoned building, that would also be helpful. And then what you will do is you will save this current living situation. Every time after that, you're going to end up documenting a current living situation to verified unsheltered time. So after you fill out your current living situation, if there's no more data points that you can answer, you're just going to simply put save and exit. And now you have completed your street outreach entry for your initial contact. Thank you.